From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Art Barnaby returns to talk about the just updated county-by-county estimates on ARC program payments for you wheat producers on your 2017 crop. He'll also address the issue of whether you grain farmers are getting your futures contract orders appropriately filled in the current electronic trading format. Then K-State's Jeff Whitworth will talk about the notable lack of alfalfa weevil pressure in stands so far this spring. That's a void that unfortunately is being filled by an onrush of pea aphids infesting alfalfa. And K-State's Charlie Lee looks at how habitat changes have affected the western meadowlark. All this and more coming up on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. Welcome once again. We've brought back by for another visit risk management specialist Art Barnaby of K-State Research and Extension to talk about more information that he's just posted for you grain producers on the agmanager.info website at K-State. Art has just worked up his updated estimates on USDA program payments under the Agricultural Risk Coverage, or ARC, program for wheat. This on a county-by-county basis here in Kansas and nationally, Art, and this for the payments on the 2017 crop due out this fall, right?
Yes. What we did is we went back and looked at the counties that did not have NASH yields and utilized RMA county yields to estimate what the payment will look like for wheat across Kansas and the rest of the country in counties that did not have NASH yields. So as a result, we've got estimates in virtually every Kansas county now. Looking at it, most of the counties by far are at zero on the 2017 crop. That's not a surprise. That could well change on the 2018 crop because we're expecting to look at some pretty low yields in 2018. So there could well be payments in 2018. But on the 17 crop, there are a few exceptions. A few counties up in the northwest we're estimating payments for, and the rest are over in the eastern third of Kansas where we don't have a lot of wheat. Looking nationally, most of the claims, payments are up in that northern plains, North Dakota, western Minnesota. Down in this part of the world, not a large number of claims when you look at the national map. What about corn and soybeans? I'm sure that will be the next question. Right. What we're waiting on is when RMA releases their county yields, which are for a supplemental coverage option. Not widely sold, but they pretty much have to produce a yield they do anyway, for nearly every county out there. As a side note to that, that's another farm bill debate. There is a push to switch from using NASH yields to using RMA yields. The argument there is the RMA yields, you fill out your yield number with criminal liability attaching. If you're not reporting that correctly, you're technically defrauding the insurance company and the government, and if you do it bad enough, they can come after you. In the case of NASS, that's a voluntary sheet that you fill out, and I don't know how many people go and look up all the numbers, or they just fill in something to get the survey out the door, and I suspect they just kind of guesstimate. So I would not argue with those who claim it is more accurate. However, if they're going to switch to it, they've also got to make the guarantee based on those RMA numbers. You can't use the NASS numbers to set the guarantee and then use the RMA numbers to settle the claim, because the truth is the NASS numbers tend to be higher than the RMA numbers. That's kind of an overview, but let's just say that's the case. Well, if you don't also do the guarantee based on the RMA yields, which tend to be higher, then you aren't going to get a good measurement as far as claims go under ARC. So I assume everybody's smart enough in D.C. to figure that one out. It also doesn't fix every problem out there, because when you get into areas, say, eastern Colorado, for example, there's not a lot of dry-line corn planted out there. And that doesn't mean there might not be some, but there's not a lot. So if somebody's eligible for an ARC payment in one of those counties, there may be virtually no RMA data there to actually calculate a county yield from. In that case, what they do is they pull data from surrounding counties and they average it together. So it's a little bit misclaimed to say that really is the county yield. That is true if we're talking about a county that's heavily insured and that is a dominant crop in that county. Sumner County wheat, that RMA number is probably dead on. In fact, I'd go a step further. I'd say it is dead on. Another fact that may cause a problem out in the future, though, is suppose Congress disappoints us and screws up the insurance contract and people stop dropping their coverage. Your database just went away. Hello?
Not an
we have to go back
position.
to NASS then, I guess. Yeah, I mean, that's if we make this switch, it's kind of assuming that people are going to continue to buy crop insurance. But, you know, when you're writing those premium checks and if you don't feel like you got good coverage, you're probably not going to write those premium checks. It's not a freebie gift thing like it's, again, been portrayed in the press. So if we start seeing a reduction in participation, either due to more of the premiums being shifted to farmers or due to changes in the contract like elimination of the harvest price, and the number of people insured decline, then that county yield number isn't going to be nearly as accurate. I don't know that anybody's really thought through that one, but it's out there. I'm getting close to retirement, so I worry about things that I don't have to fix.
And one last thing briefly, and this is an article that was just posted on Ag Manager. It refers to grain futures contracts and how those are formulated, to put it that way. What's this about, Art?
Well, basically, the question came up is how can you have a offer that's higher than the market and not get a fill under computerized trading? Several things going on. First of all, there was a story at our conference in Kansas City that K-State participated with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission last April, and this is a follow-up to an earlier paper, but we put in there this business of an allocation for the market maker. And right away, people saw conspiracies that the big companies were going to the front of the line to get their orders filled under this market maker algorithm or part of the algorithm. Turns out that is not actually used on any of the grains. None. The only time the CMEs ever used a market maker allocation in their allocation method is when they were trying to develop a new contract and it had very little volume in it. So the only time they've used that, and you got to remember, CME is a profit-making organization, so it's to their advantage to have markets that are working. After that, it's kind of like probably what you think. It's really involved. You need to go through and read the paper. But basically, it's first in, first out, gets their fill first. But there's situations where they prorate part of the fills too, unless there's not enough orders out there. Bottom line, me personally, I'm giving you my opinion now, and I try not to do that, but I really do have a strong opinion about this. I don't miss the pits at all. Back in the pit trading days, I was doing some work with a company, and we weren't getting fills or didn't get fills one day when we had bids that are in there. And the story we got back was, well, that trade took place on the other side of the pit. That's not possible with this. Right. This is a computerized allocation. I would suggest to you that as far as farmers getting their orders filled who use futures, I think this method is more fair than what we had before, because I think you're just as likely to get your order filled as the next guy. If your order is the first in line, you're going to get filled.
You think this leaves less potential for error or manipulation there?
Absolutely. Now, the one exception is spoofing, and don't ask me to explain that. But spoofing is not possible with live traders. It is allegedly done where someone puts out an order that's a fake order, and they try to move the market, okay? Well, if your order's sitting out there and they move it in your direction, they just filled it for you. So I kind of like spoofing if it moves it in my direction. So if I'm trying to sell it and somebody's trying to spoof it to drive it up a little, I just got my order filled if he's trying to drive it up and I'm selling to hedge my crop.
But if they're driving it down, you're not happy.
Yeah, if you're driving it down, well, of course, unless you're buying for a future supply of feed, I suppose you could be. There are reasons some farmers would be on the other side of the market. But yes, that's exactly right. So even that, I don't see as necessarily bad for farmers because most farmers are not there every day. They put an order in, they leave it set at least for a day or two to see if they get a fill. And if somebody spoofs it and moves it in your direction, then you get a fill that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Now, if you're in there working with ADM or Cargill or you're a spec trader, yeah, you're mad, to say it lightly. And there were some hot tempers in that meeting in Kansas City. There was some strong feelings about what was going on with this spoofing. The problem is the board has the CFTC, I should say, as the enforcement arm. It's difficult to prove when someone is spoofed. Now, there was a case that happened, and I don't recall the name, but basically what happened was the trading company decided they'd just pay the fine, but they never agreed that they did anything wrong. In other words, they were accused of spoofing. They said, okay, we'll give you some money to go away. CFTC said, okay, we'll take your money. And nobody admitted any fault. But if the CFTC is out there making noise, traders know they're watching. Again, my personal opinion, this computer allocation of order fills is more fair to farmers than what we had before. In fact, I don't see anything that's unfair to farmers. I'll be real blunt about it. But you can read this on our website. It's very technical. If you haven't used futures, it's going to look you'll probably throw it away and say, that stuff doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm sorry about that, but this is the way it is. And this has been reviewed by the Board of Trade, too. I mean, we went the full 9 yards here. And beyond that, I'm going to let my co-author follow up with any other details. If he wants to make this even more complicated, I'll let him do that.
That would be Dan O'Brien of K-State. Again, check out all of this new information on these subjects we've been covering with Art at agmanager.info. Art, once more, many thanks. Art Barnaby, Risk Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. We're back now on Agriculture Today, and around to another update on what's happening in our field crops around Kansas in as far as insect activity and whether or not U.S. producers could or should do anything about that. Jeff Whitworth along with us once again, crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, probably the more pressing problems as it comes to insects right now out there, Jeff, what's happening in alfalfa? Among other things, pea aphids may be at work, you say.
Yes, you know what, Eric? This is probably the first year in the last 20 or more that, at least throughout north central Kansas, the majority of the alfalfa fields have not required treating for alfalfa weevil larvae. Now, there were some fields that were treated. I didn't say they weren't treated. I just said requiring treating. And there were some in south central Kansas that actually did exceed treatment thresholds. But this is probably the first year in a long time that really and truly we avoided alfalfa weevil larvae. And it was really kind of a strange, just to go back a month or so ago, every time we would get what they call a flush of eggs hatching, and the little larvae would be out, and then we would get a sub-freezing bout of nighttime temperatures, and it would kill a bunch of them. And so it ended up really knocking about 2/3 to 3/4 of those little weevil larvae out. And so we just did not have a real alfalfa weevil problem, at least like we normally do, which is good for two reasons. Number one, that did not kill all of the beneficials that are out there. Alfalfa fields are sinks for lots of different types of insects, but especially beneficials. But because we didn't spray also, there's a lot more pea aphids, at least throughout north central Kansas, than we're normally used to seeing. Normally, the pea aphids and the alfalfa weevil larvae will build up, and then they'll spray for the weevils, and it will kill or reduce the pea aphids considerably. But it also, at the same time, will reduce the beneficials. Well, this year, that hasn't happened for the most part. So in the last month, we have seen a pretty good buildup of pea aphids. Pea aphids are probably the first aphids that start infesting alfalfa in the spring. Now, I say that because if it's a relatively warm winter like we had this winter, they can overwinter in Kansas also, but they're the first ones that usually start becoming active in the spring, and that's what we saw. And they really like cool, drier conditions like we had in April. You know, in April, unlike May, we had a lot of cooler than normal temperatures, and that really allowed the pea aphids to explode, their populations to explode. They are an aphid, so they don't have to wait to find a mate. They don't have to wait for eggs to hatch for the most part. They just start, they're females, and they just start producing females. So those populations can, under the right conditions, can increase pretty quickly. And that's what we saw throughout April and really up until about a week or so ago. However, as the alfalfa is now finally starting to grow a little bit. Matter of fact, there seem to be cutting or swathing alfalfa considerably around. The beneficials are starting to catch up with the pea aphid populations. So we had some pea aphid counts 2 weeks ago where they exceeded a treatment threshold, which the treatment threshold, well, most treatment thresholds on 10-inch alfalfa is like 20 to 50 aphids per stem. On 20-inch alfalfa, it's double that, you know, kind of that situation. But there again, it depends on the condition of the alfalfa and a lot of other things. But once you get to 20 to 30 pea aphids per stem, we always start watching it. And if the growing conditions aren't great, sometimes you need to treat. But before that happened, we started seeing all these beneficials because there was no alfalfa weevil treatments that decimated them. So now we're seeing from 2 weeks ago where we had 50 to 60 pea aphids per stem in a lot of our fields to just a couple of days ago, they were down to 5 or 6 pea aphids per stem.
So the problem is starting to take care of itself.
The problem, the beneficials they're going crazy out there. I mean, there's lots of lady beetles, green lacewings, and the little wasps parasitizing the aphids, causing mummies everywhere. It's really kind of neat. If you haven't gotten out there and you haven't cut your alfalfa yet, get out and look because they're really doing a number on the pea aphids. But as the alfalfa continues to be stressed, and if it's swathed, we're also starting to see some spotted alfalfa aphids. The spotted alfalfa aphid comes in after the pea aphid. The pea aphid is kind of a larger lime green or darker green aphid with black tip cornicles. Spotted alfalfa aphids are lime green, but they have spots, and they're smaller, but they prefer warm, dry weather. So usually we get the pea aphids. Usually those are taken care of because you spray for your alfalfa weevils, or the weather gets warm and they go away. But now we're starting to see spotted alfalfa weevils. And those are a little bit of a problem. About the same treatment threshold. It depends on, you know, the weather and how the stress is in the plants and all that. But if you got 20 to 50 per stem, 10-inch alfalfa, you may consider treating if it's starting to wilt the plants. Because they will, if under, like I said, under stress conditions, they can start turning the stems and the leaves yellow, and then the plants will start wilting, especially around the tips of the plants. So you got to keep your eye on it. But I'm hoping there's so many beneficials around, and I'm hoping just because the fields were swathed, that doesn't remove the beneficials. That will probably remove a lot of the aphids. But the aphids are going to build up a lot faster than beneficials because, like I said, they don't have to wait to find a mate. They don't have to wait for the eggs to hatch. They just start producing female aphids, and those aphids start producing female aphids, and they can do that in 7 to 12 days during this kind of warm summertime conditions. So those populations can build up quite quickly if there are no beneficials to help control them. So we're just urging everybody we avoided alfalfa weevil
Right.
for the first time in a long time. But the pea aphids seem to be doing really well. Hopefully we've kind of avoided the pea aphid because of the situation now where they're cutting their alfalfa, but the spotted aphids are also starting to build up. So just get out and monitor your fields at least weekly after you get through swathing and make sure it's coming back okay.
Well, alfalfa growers, don't let your guard down. These aphids could build up in sufficient numbers again to cause problems with the subsequent cuttings. Stay on top of that. You're getting some word on a corn insect concern or two as well, you say, Jeff.
Yes, it is kind of strange because here it's mid-May and some of the corn is just now starting to germinate or it's just in the V2 or 3 leaf stage. But the seed has been in the ground quite a while because of the dry conditions. Now, that seed is treated, and the treatments work really well to protect the seed and the seedling for 21 to 28 days against seedling pests or seed pests. But if you've planted prior to 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and your crop is just now starting to germinate, which I have seen a couple in the last couple of days that fit that description exactly, that pesticide, that insecticide, is probably broken down. So I got a couple of calls recently, and I haven't been out to check, but they think it's wireworm or white grub problems. Even though the seed was treated, the insecticide is not active enough to protect the seedling plants. So they're wondering if it is a problem with the insecticide. It's probably not. It's probably a timing problem. You know, you planted and it was dry and it just didn't germinate, and so that insecticide is broken down. It's not protecting the seedling like you're used to. But if you do replant, you shouldn't have a problem because, again, you got 21 to 28 days. Also, I have not received one call this year about black cutworms in corn, and I'm guessing that's just an anomaly because of the weather this year, because usually in southeast Kansas we have quite a few calls about black cutworms taking out stands here or there, or at least partial areas in a field. But this year, at least I haven't gotten a call, or maybe we just got the education to everybody that there's not much you can do other than replant.
No treatment is warranted here at this point.
Really, there's not, unless you just replant. And if you replant, that insecticide should last 3 to 4 weeks. One other thing, there are grasshoppers. We've just noticed the little small nymphs just now starting to hatch out. So if you're out in the borders of your field or the weedy areas around the field, the waterways, keep your eye on the little tiny grasshopper nymphs. And if you feel like there's going to be too many of them, now's the time to treat, or maybe wait another 2 weeks till there's a few more of them, the eggs have hatched, and treat them before they get too large, too mobile, and start spreading out into the crops, because the eggs were laid in the undisturbed portions around the field or in the weedy areas or the grassy waterways or someplace in the...
It's a different look to the insect pressure that we see here in the latter stages of May now in our field crops, principally alfalfa and corn currently.
But just remember, as that corn does come up, if it was in the ground, if that seed was in the ground a little bit longer, it's still going to be more vulnerable to, some of the other early season pests that maybe you're not used to seeing, just because it is protected for 2 to 3 weeks, and a lot of times it does germinate after 7 or 8 days. So you got 2 weeks protection. This year you may not have that. So keep that in mind when talking about flea beetles and some of the other little early season pests.
We always appreciate you keeping us in the know on what's going on insect-wise in our field crops at any given point of the year. So, Jeff, thanks for coming over once more.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
Crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth of K-State Research and Extension on This Agriculture Today. We'll break away now and then be back with more after this over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Over to today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. The USDA posting its weekly Kansas crop progress and condition report late yesterday, and for the week ending this past Sunday, the topsoil moisture supplies in the state, 2% surplus, 47% adequate, 51% still short to very short, and subsoil moisture at 1% surplus, 41% adequate, and 58% short to very short. The state of the winter wheat crop in Kansas is at 15% good to excellent, 38% fair, and 47% still poor to very poor. Winter wheat jointed at 96%, wheat headed now at 71%. That's well behind the 80% for the 5-year average on the date. Corn planting in Kansas, now 82% done. That's very near the average. And emergence at 56%. That's ahead of the 49% average for the date. Soybean planting, now 50% complete. That's well ahead of the 24% average. And emergence of beans at 21%. Again, well ahead of the 8% average. Grain sorghum planted at 8%. That's very close to the average. Pasture and range conditions this week, 25% good to excellent, 44% fair, and 31% poor to very poor around the state. As for the national numbers on corn and soybean planting, here's an update from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
A window of good weather this week helped farmers catch up on corn planting.
Right on par with the 5-year average on May 20th, 81% planted. 5-year average is 81%. Last year, 82%.
That was USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
The big jump in progress this week was across the upper Midwest, where planting had previously been delayed. So for those 5 or 6 days where it was wide open, we saw some incredible planting progress in states like South Dakota and Minnesota.
He says the warm weather also helped with corn emergence.
Overall, reaching the 50% mark, halfway mark on emergence by May 20th. And that is ahead of the 5-year average of 47%, just 1 point behind last year's 55%.
2 states with notable corn emergence are Indiana and Ohio. Rippey says it was a pretty good week for planting progress for soybeans.
And overall, passing the halfway mark during the week to reach 56% planted by May 20th, significantly ahead of the 5-year average of 44%, and even ahead of last year's 50%.
He points to a strong planting pace in the upper Midwest.
Minnesota was the number 1 state for progress during the week, moving from 11% of the soybeans planted a week ago to 48% now.
Meanwhile, at least 20% of the soybean crop was planted last week in states including
Iowa, South Dakota, and Wisconsin.
Warm weather also helped with soybean emergence, with the national number jumping from 10% to 26%, which is significantly ahead of the 5-year average of 15%. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And to round out the crop condition story, grain sorghum nationally 39% planted as of Sunday compared to the 38% average. And winter wheat across the nation 61% headed behind the average of 64%. The national winter wheat condition holding steady from the previous week at 36% good to excellent. That's still the crop's lowest rating since the 2014-15 winter wheat production season. Do want to take this opportunity to remind you one more time that K-State is hosting a Cover Crops Field Day that is set for this Friday, the 25th, at the HB Ranch near Hayes. They'll be getting into all kinds of aspects on cover crop production, the latest research covered by K-State's John Holman. There'll be the plot tour by Augustino Brewer of K-State. Cover crops and beneficial insects, J.P. Michaud will cover that. And grazing cover crops by K-State's Sandy Johnson, plus much more to be looked at during that field day. It'll start at 9:30 at the HB Ranch, just south of the Cedar Bluff Dam on Kansas Highway 147. Please RSVP for the meal count at 785-625-3425. 785-625-3425. On we go now to this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I'd like to talk with the Kansas dairy farmers concerning June is Dairy Month again. So as we think about Dairy Month and we think about our dairy farms, how are we going to celebrate this on our dairies? I know it's a really tough time out there in the dairy industry right now, and maybe celebration isn't the first thing on your mind. But I want to remind you of a couple of things. As I look at organizations, there's probably two things that we actually really control. One is our attitude, and the second one is our relationships with those around us. So whether we're looking at our organization or we're looking at ourselves individually, these are really two things that we can actually have control over, regardless of what might be going on around us. So in light of that, let's think about June as Dairy Month, and let's think about how we're going to celebrate it on our dairy farms. Some of the things you might want to consider as you think about this is, people really do enjoy visiting your farms. They really do enjoy learning about what you do every day so that they have a safe supply of dairy products on the grocery shelf every time they go to the store. It's really important that you share your story and the story of the dairy industry. So I'd encourage you to take opportunity as you think about June and maybe getting together and celebrating the month that's dedicated to our dairy industry. Some of the things you might want to think about is, you can start small. Maybe it's just inviting your employees and their families to maybe a cookout. Cook up some of those cheeseburgers and utilize some of that cull dairy cow as well as some good American cheese on those burgers, whichever variety of cheese that you might choose. You might also think about maybe inviting some of your friends to a similar type activity. Maybe you actually want to join in with some of the local groups that are around that might be interested in coming to your farm for an early morning breakfast meeting or something like that. There's various ways that we can celebrate June and celebrate our dairy industry, and I'd encourage you to take opportunity to do that. Many times we pass up these opportunities, and it's really a lost opportunity that we have to share our story. Please keep in mind that as we think about the consumer public, the people they really trust are the people behind the product, which is you, the dairy farmer, and your families and employees that actually work with the cows every day. So June is a time to salute you and your operations as well as our total dairy industry. Take opportunity to meet with your community, meet with your friends, and share your story in the dairy industry. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take time to celebrate June as Dairy Month.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
On this part of Agriculture Today, it's our weekly wildlife feature with K-State Research and Extension's wildlife specialist, Charlie Lee. Charlie will profile today the state bird, the western meadowlark, and you've background on it and how it came to be the designated bird for Kansas.
Well, the western meadowlarks are very popular. It was suggested and voted on as the state bird by school children in 1925, who by a margin of more than 40% of the votes selected it over the cardinal and the bobwhite quail. It's also the state bird in Nebraska and Wyoming. It's found in the western two-thirds of the continent. Certainly was a very popular bird, a very numerous bird when this country was settled. It stays around in the winter, around haystacks and where livestock are being fed. A very hardy type bird, and our settlers really appreciated the sounds of western meadowlarks.
And it's obviously well adapted to this region of the country then.
Yeah, surprisingly to some people, they eat both grain and weed seeds along with insects. They have a very definite dietary pattern depending upon season. They forage for grain during the winter and early spring, and then for weed seeds in the fall. They have a kind of a unique feeding behavior called gaping. This very long pointed bill, they probe that into the soil and then open their bill. That allows them to access seeds and insects that other birds can't reach. And occasionally they'll eat eggs of other grassland bird species, and even in hard winters they may feed on carcasses such as roadkill around. So it's somewhat of a unique, varied diet. Their nest locations are on the ground, in pastures, prairies, or other grassland habitat. The female will seek out a small depression, such as a cow hoof print, that's shielded in dense vegetation that makes the nest very difficult to see. The female uses the bill to shape that depression into a cup-like shape and then lines the nest with soft, dry grasses and pliable stems. Sometimes those nests will have a hood or a dome across them. Even occasionally you will find those that have a tunnel entrance that may be a foot long or longer as the bird goes back and forth to the nest site through those runways. The males will often have two mates, and occasionally the western meadowlarks will have two broods each summer.
The state of the western meadowlark in Kansas, then, you say that there is some worry about a modest decline in numbers?
Well, it's somewhat of a decline, like with many other grassland-dependent species. They're numerous, but their breeding populations have declined to more than 1% a year from 1966 to 2015, which is a cumulative decline of 48%. That's according to the North American Breeding Bird Survey. But another group, the Partners in Flight, estimates the global breeding population of western meadowlarks at over 85 million, with about 85% of those spending part of the year in the United States, some others in Mexico, and a few in Canada. So it's not really on a continental concern. What didn't show up on the 2016 State of North American Bird Watch list, I think the declines probably are a result of conversion of grassland breeding and wintering habitat to other uses, probably agricultural uses, or even, in some cases, suburban housing-type developments. There are other factors that affect western meadowlarks populations. That'd be pesticides and habitat degradation because of invasive plant species, fire suppression that allows grassland to become woodland over time. And I think then there's probably also some differences between native grasslands and planted or introduced grasslands that certainly have played a role in the decline of western meadowlarks.
Well, the status of the western meadowlark has, in fact, inspired a couple of studies, one in Kansas, one in Nebraska. What were those about?
Well, the one in Kansas was at the Smoky Hill Air National Guard Range in central Kansas. Basically, they found that the more heterogeneity that you could get with vegetative structure seemed to be better, and eastern meadowlarks were less abundant in the burned units than in any of the other treatments that they had there, which included grazing and idle fields. The study in Nebraska looked at it a little bit different. Those were in the sandhill areas, in the sub-irrigated meadows in the Nebraska sandhills. Found there that the habitat preference varied depending on the age of the fledgling and the temperature. At the higher temperatures, the fledglings tended to select sites that had deeper litter and shorter vegetation. Had a lot of problems in that particular site when they radio tracked these 46 western meadowlark fledglings. Predation resulted in about a 50% death loss, and looked at it on an annual basis. A large number of that, 35% of it, was from predators. 9% was from haying operations. And then the rest, 56%, was from undetermined causes. 88% of the depredated fledglings were tracked back to live snakes. And most of those were bull snakes, so certainly in that particular environment, bull snakes were a significant predator on western meadowlarks. They suggested prescribed burning can decrease the litter depth, and the associated abundance of snakes in those grasslands, but prescribed burning and reducing the litter is not going to be an accepted practice in the area where those meadows are cut for livestock feed.
All of that considered, then, is the western meadowlark deserving conservation attention?
Well, I think probably not as much of attention as some of the other grassland species, but I'd look at it as a species that's an indicator species. We tend to kind of overlook those that are very numerous, and when you've lost almost 50% of the number in the last 50 to 60 years, there's probably some cause for concern.
That's some important background, then, on the western meadowlark. Once again, it is the state bird here in Kansas, and we appreciate the word on this. Charlie, thank you. He's a wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Charlie Lee. So goes our Tuesday edition. Thanks for being along with us. Once more, check out our podcast, which you can have downloaded automatically to your mobile device using your app. Type in Agriculture Today, Kansas. You can find it. Or go to agtoday.net. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.